a healthy household is one of the most noble endeavors, and is one of the endeavors that spending money upon it is one of the things that we can spend, and we should spend money upon keeping our households as healthy and as safe as possible. In that arena, you have a lot of voices talking about what is health, what is longevity, what should we be doing towards the pursuit of longevity, what we should be doing towards the pursuit of health. And within those discussions, there are many individuals and many voices, appropriately, mind you, talking about the role of genetics. Because, of course, after all, let's start from there, which is what my specialty is as a clinical geneticist, genomicist. My goal, my profession, is to study the human operating manual. What is the human operating manual? Your genetic inheritance. You should look at your genes, the genes that you've inherited from mom and dad, which are now housed within you, and which, if you choose to pass it on to children, will be the greatest legacy that you will ever pass on. When we think about legacies that we pass on, the things that come to mind are wealth, our name, our family name, our reputation. These are all the legacies we think of passing on. But we don't quite think as much about the greatest legacy that we will ever pass on, if we choose to do so, is our genetic makeup. Because, of course, we say, well, if we're going to have children, we don't have much say in the matter other than obviously the spouses that you choose. But you actually do have a lot of say in the matter, because this legacy, the greatest of all legacies that you will ever pass on, were you to choose to do so, i.e., in having biologic children, your own children, is their genetic legacy. And while you can't control, quote unquote, the genes and the version of the genes that your children inherit, what you most certainly can do is you can equip yourself, you can educate yourself about what version of these genes are you passing on. And let's take a moment of pause there. These genes, as I mentioned, the genes that you inherit from mom and dad, they do what? They comprise, they make up your operating manual. Genes are the multifarious, the multitude, the hundreds, the thousands of tiny little instructions telling your cells at every waking, living moment, telling your cells, waking, sleeping moment, how to do the various jobs that all of us, male, female, independent of our ethnicity, independent of our age, at any given point in time, the human body has jobs to do. Our cells have jobs to do. We have to do what? We have to, in order to live, we've got to produce energy. And in order to produce energy, we've got to absorb nutrients into our cells. We've got to sort out those nutrients into energy source of nutrients, into building blocks, into reparation blocks. Okay. And the cells will use all of these building blocks, whether they be the energy sources, whether they be the building blocks, to keep us thriving, to keep us alive, to keep us growing, or if we stopped growing, to keep us moving forward. And the genes, i.e., the instructions that you inherit, are the very instructions that do these jobs. Not only to produce energy, not only to grow our cells, not only to repair our cells, but to ward off infections, to ward off and deal with toxins that come into the body, whether they be intentional or unintentional, whether they be chemical toxins from the outside coming in, whether they be metabolites within the body, i.e., as we live, there is a law of physics that applies to the body. You cannot create energy except that there is a byproduct. You cannot burn wood for heat except that there is smoke. Similarly, you cannot consume food as an energy source except there is a smoke, a byproduct. And these byproducts, it's the great mystery of life that the very thing that you do to live, eat, drink, and breathe are the very things you do it to stay alive, But in so doing, eating, drinking, and breathing produce the byproducts that precisely over time age us, and that ultimately, for one reason or the other, when we leave this world, which we all have to do at some point in time, there's this yin yang between what we do to stay alive are the very things, other than getting an illness, other than having an accident, may God protect us all, but just the mere fact that we eat and we breathe to stay alive also causes the very things, the byproduct, the smoke. What is the smoke here? The oxidative rusting, the aging of the body comes from the very thing that keeps us alive. This is the miracle. This is the incredible yin yang of life. And all of these processes, all of the instructions that allow our cells to do all of the jobs that our cells have to do, whether they be heart cells, whether they be liver cells or kidney cells, whether they be brain cells or skin cells or eye cells, they all have the same jobs to do. And the clinical geneticist in my life's work has been what? Learning to read the operating manual of the human body, because that is what it is. It's a manual of all of these instructions, pages and pages and volumes and volumes. And for those of you who have a bit of a biology bend, a bit of interest in this, the human operating manual is comprised within 23 volumes, i.e., 23 chromosomes, and we have two copies of each of those 23 chromosomes. 23 chromosomes we get from mom, 23 chromosomes we get from dad. And those chromosomes are the equivalent of the volumes. And in each of these volumes, in each of these large, encyclopedic volumes, of which we've got 23 of them, contain the chapters and the paragraphs. When you understand how to read these volumes, it is truly a miracle. It is an incredible sign. It's an incredible miracle that these genes, these instructions, are exactly like paragraphs, which are instructions telling the cell how to do every little job. And we inherit these instructions from mom and dad. And true enough, we can't change what we've inherited. But what we can do is we can learn about the versions, because as much as we all inherit essentially the same instructions, after all, we're all human beings, our cells have to do the same thing. As much as we inherit the same instructions, we don't inherit the same versions of those instructions. Some of these instructions, many of these instructions that are responsible for all of the important little details in our cells, some of us, we inherit efficient, very clear. If you were on a construction site and you're building a building, the clearer the blueprint, the clearer they do this first, then do this, then do this, and there's no room for misunderstanding, the better the outcome. It's exactly the same with your genes. All of us have examples where we've inherited the perfect version of the gene. The instruction is clear, the ability to do the job is clear, and we get the job done perfectly fine. But we also all have examples where some of the instructions we inherited from mom and dad, the instruction is not as clear, the outcome is not as optimal. And to the degree that we have more of those, and to the degree which of those instructions that we've inherited from mom and dad are suboptimal, impacts our trajectory of health. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking a little bit about my life's work in studying what are these examples of instructions that I've learned along the way, that I have spent my career, and God willing, many years to come, amongst geneticists in the world, being, as I mentioned earlier, reading the most instructional manuals. And when you read an instructional manual, when you read the blueprint of an incredible skyscraper, it's not enough that you read the blueprint in your office. You really, in order to understand this blueprint, you want to understand the outcome. So what is important? You've got to go to that skyscraper. You've got to go take a tour and you've got to say, oh, now I understand what the architects meant. Now I can see the outcome of the blueprint, the outcome of the instructions. I can see it. I can see how the building is working. I can see the systems within the building. I can see the architectural design. So what's really important when you're a clinical geneticist is you've not only got to read the genes, you've not only got to understand what the genes do and what are their instructions and what are the variations and what are the outcomes when you've got a suboptimal variation versus an optimal variation. You've got to be able to sit with the person to whom the operating manual belongs, and you've got to spend time with that person talking to them, asking them, what is their health trajectory? What is this great journey that we're all on? How does their body work? When their body does not work as well, when they're ill, when they get injured, how does the body repair itself? How does the body deal with the fuel that we're putting in? How does the body deal with the smoke? i.e., the metabolites from the fuel we put in. You've got to ask all of these questions. You've got to study the outcome of the blueprint in order to understand the blueprint. Why am I emphasizing this? I emphasize this not because that's what I do, because it's my passion to inform and educate parents that many of the people out there talking about genetics, they talk about it from a TikTok, Instagram perspective, what's cool. They don't actually have the qualification to sit with a person to understand the blueprint. And they haven't sat with thousands and thousands of individuals. In other words, they've not seen thousands and thousands of outcomes of the blueprint in order that they can understand the blueprint. And if I had to differentiate myself, forgive me for a moment, that's what I have done more than anyone else. My peers speaking, not me speaking. I have seen well over 20,000 blueprints where I've studied the blueprint, I've studied the outcome of the blueprint, and we start to make the correlations. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about today with that degree of integrity, that degree of privilege to have been able to do so. Now, I want to tell you a little story because all of you came online today and continue to come online largely because of an interest for your children and for your family, i.e., because for most of you, many of you, you may have children on the spectrum, this ubiquitous word that we use, the autistic spectrum disorder or spectrum. Okay, we've got children and we want to understand how are they developing. Are they challenged in their development in some way? And how, as parents, because we will stop at nothing as parents to equip our children for the best possible health trajectory that we can afford them. And there's another component to this, and that is many of you, some of you, may have had a child on the spectrum. It may be your first child. You see some of the challenges, and they are angelic, all of our children. But we do have to deal with challenges sometimes, depending on the severity they are on the spectrum. And then we are worried. Will I have another child who is challenged on the spectrum? Can I do something to avoid this happening again? Is this what is in the genetic pool from mom and dad? These are the type of questions. And so what I hope to give to you today is a sense of a much deeper understanding. I was involved in the Human Genome Project. I was the inventor of one of the techniques used to study the Human Genome Project. So I've really been doing this for my career. And I've been involved in some of the original and first studies on the spectrum disorders, as well as many other developmental disorders. But now I spend my career doing what? I spend my career working with individuals who simply want to be the healthiest versions of themselves. And so what I want to share with you today, whether you are a parent of a child on the spectrum or not, and for your own selves, what are the questions? What are the things that you should know in order that you have the best opportunity for health. And especially in the times that we're in and the times that we can see if we're intelligent enough in the future, the thing that is most worth our effort, especially for our most beloved, our children, keeping them safe, keeping them healthy, ensuring that our children embark upon the first years of life on the right trajectory towards health is the single greatest gift that you can give them and that you can give yourselves as we get older and as we age, that we have homes of healthy individuals that can take care of one another. This is the greatest gift that we can give each other. And this is going to be the theme of today's discussion. Now, number one, genes are instructions, as we mentioned. They are instructions. We all have them. We all have the almost the same outcome. We're a human being, which means we have to have all the same moving parts, all of the same things happening in our bodies when we wake, when we sleep, but we don't have these jobs being done exactly the same, one person to the next, depending on the genes we've inherited, the versions of the genes, depending on the fuel we put into our bodies, depending on how we use our bodies, both physically, environmentally, and our lifestyle choices. Now, I want to tell you a story very quickly to set the stage. This was everything I've just said is an introduction. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Now I want to tell you a story that really got me upon the path studying with families with children on the spectrum, that really, for me, decoded it. It really emphasized how much we were missing. And the story has two parts to it. The first is purely the scientific part. So I was involved with some of my dear colleagues, some of the very best autism spectrum specialists in the world, whether it be clinical or at a genetic level. One of them, one of the great minds in this field, Dr. Steve Scherer, was a colleague of mine. He is the head of genomics at the University of Toronto Sick Kids Hospital. Sick Kids Hospital being one of the best, world's foremost children's hospital worldwide. And when we studied autism spectrum, what we were looking for, so here's the first thing that I want you to understand. When we look genetically, when we ask the question that is the most sort of basic science question, is there a gene or genes that are mutated? Something is broken. Something is not right with the gene sequence. And can I point at that gene, that instruction, and ask the question, because this gene, this unique important gene, maybe it's a gene involved in the way the neurons of the brain form. That would make sense if we're dealing with children on the spectrum, if we're dealing with children that have a developmental delay. Maybe it's genes involved in some mechanistic function in the body, the instruction, and maybe that instruction has something that was wrong in it. Therefore, the outcome of the instruction isn't going to be quite the same. It's not going to be quite as optimal. And because of that thing, we see the development of a child with a particular challenge. Okay? When you take this approach to science and when you apply it to children on the spectrum, do you know something? To this date, still, no more than 20%. We're still between 18 to 20% of children on the spectrum, 1 in 5 children, only 1 in 5 children, can we find the genetic thing that is broken, that is, the sequence is wrong, that led to the child being on the spectrum. Only 1 in 5, meaning the 5 children are on the spectrum, but we can only figure out one of them due to a specific genetic abnormality. 1 in 5, despite the years and the tens, the hundreds of millions of dollars that has been spent by countries, by universities on this incredible phenomena of children on the spectrum. So what is it that we're missing? The other 4 children that are on the spectrum, does it have nothing to do with genetics? Is it purely environmental? Is it purely food-based? Is it something else? The answer is no, fairly obviously, because children on the spectrum tend to be born into families, tend to be, who are also children on the spectrum, meaning there clearly is something familial, generally speaking. So if it's in families, there must be a genetic component. And if there's a genetic component, how come we're only finding only one in five can we figure out what's wrong? Four out of these children that are on the spectrum, something is there genetically, something is affecting the development, but we're missing it. So this is the first of the two stories. I want to clarify this to you because many people miss this. Only one in five children on the spectrum have we actually figured out what is wrong. And I'll warn you all, because I was waiting for folks to come online, I am going to be a little bit delayed when I said before we get to question and answers. So I hope you bear with me. I've already seen a question. Is this passed on from mom and dad or both? It's from both, as you will see shortly. Okay, so these genetic, both for the one in five child, where there can be something that is truly broken, it can be passed on, believe it or not, from mom and dad, even though mom and dad did not have or was not on the spectrum. It can be a new mutation, something that happened in the development of the sperm. So, in other words, dad did not have it, but when his sperm was being made, something got broken. Maybe due to environmental exposures, maybe due to something else, or it can happen in the eggs of mom. So, mom is fine. This isn't the one in five. This isn't the child that is clearly on the spectrum. It can happen from either mom or dad. And usually it's a new event because, of course, mom and dad, generally speaking, are not on the spectrum in this example. But for the four other children, a five, for the four other children that we've not figured out, why is this child on the spectrum? Almost always, both mom and dad, and almost always the thing that is suboptimal is already in mom, is already in dad. And it is just because of the unique combination of the suboptimal things. In other words, mom may not have had enough of the suboptimal instructions that it impacted her. Dad may not have had enough of the suboptimal instructions that impacted him, but you put the two together and you get just the right, wrong combinations to now impact the child in question, especially when we do not know what to look for, and especially when we are making wrong nutrition decisions, wrong lifestyle decisions, wrong medical decisions, as we will see shortly. So this is setting the stage. Does it get more obvious as generations progress? The answer is yes, as we will see shortly, if we don't do something about it. And this is why I've dedicated my life's work to this, because as you all know and as you've all heard, the incidence rate of children on the spectrum seem to be going up. And just let's put to bed, in science, there is something called ascertainment bias. What does this mean? It means something was always there, but the more you look for it, the more you find it. So ascertainment bias means I am seeing an increase in something, not because the thing is increasing, but because I'm looking for it more. That's called ascertainment bias. Let me make it clear. While there is an aspect of ascertainment bias in why we are seeing more autistic children, by no means is it the only reason. We are seeing more autistic children on the spectrum because there are more children on the spectrum because of mistakes we've been making, and unless we solve it, unless we know as parents and educate ourselves, this is going to be more and more and more promulgated with generations to come. So now the second part, the second main story, and I want you all to listen to this carefully because it was the story that really changed my entire career's trajectory. So as I mentioned to you, by the way, for those of you who've not seen my career path or know who I am, I was trained as a classically trained cancer specialist, by the way. And as a geneticist, you choose, do you want to specialize in cancer genetics or do you want to specialize in childhood development, children, pediatric genetics. So you call it cancer genetics or pediatric genetics. Because I didn't have much of a life, I did both. So I was one of the few geneticists that specialized both in cancer genetics and pediatric genetics. My beautiful father used to famously say, "Son, are you ever going to get a real job, or are you just going to stay in school?" And may God bless him that he stood by my side while I educated myself, him and my mom, both. And so I was trained in both of these paths. But it was not until about 15 years ago, actually 16 years now, the story I'm about to tell you happened. And it changed my career trajectory and my understanding of autism remarkably. So this was in about 2010, 2011. I was in Toronto, which is where originally I was based. And being the geneticist that I was known for, whenever there were clinical trials, whenever there were different studies, I would be one of the geneticists, because of my dual training, to be called in to help with the design of the study. And this study was something completely from left field for me, completely from left field. It was a study because, for those of you know Canada, where Toronto is, in the southeast part of Canada, we've got a huge problem. Bear with me, you will understand why this is relevant to you. We've got a huge problem with Lyme disease. Lyme disease is a debilitating neurologic disease, can cause fatigue, can cause even immobility, brain fog, a feeling that you just can't do anything. It's caused by a bacteria, the Borrelia burgdorferi bacteria, that is transmitted through ticks that live on deers. And we've got a lot of deers, we've got a lot of Bambis in Ontario, Toronto, and it has become almost an epidemic. And so there was a consortium studying patients who had Lyme disease, and they were noticing something incredible. They were noticing that when they treated the Lyme disease in the way that medical practice was known, antibiotics to treat the Lyme disease, there was a subset of patients that would recover very quickly and very well. There was a subset of patients that would recover, but they'd always have lingering symptoms, even though the worst symptoms went away. And then there was a subset that could just never recover efficiently, even though they were put on antibiotics. And so whenever you have a spread like this is when geneticists are called in. Geneticists are called in to say, hey, we think we've got the same disease, Lyme disease, so it should be the same phenomena. We're treating it the same way. How come the outcome is different? Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. This applies to children in the spectrum. We think we have children in the spectrum. We're reading about all of the things people are doing for children in the spectrum. Some parents, correctly, will swear by the amazing advancement their child made when they tried A, B, or C. Other parents say, we didn't see as good results. And other parents would say, oh my God, it made my child worse. So whenever you have this phenomena where you think you're dealing with a homogeneous population, in this case, the Lyme disease population, but you have a heterogeneous, different outcomes, in comes the geneticists. We're called in to say, hey, are we actually dealing with the same? Can you help us understand what's going on? So I was called in, and the first thing I observed, two things that changed my life's career trajectory. One of the things I observed is not relevant for today, although it is relevant for all of the ladies on this call. The first thing I observed was a majority of the people who had Lyme disease in the study were women. And so I said, what, are women going camping more than men? Are they more exposed? Do they go pat Bambi the deer more than men? And is this why they're getting Lyme disease? How is there so many more women than men who had Lyme disease? Notice what I just did there, because the doctors thought they had Lyme disease. So the first of the two oddities that I observed as a geneticist, I'm trained to look at populations, I'm trained to look at the signs. The first thing was studying these hundreds of patients, going, why is there so many women? Way more women than men. First thing we learned, and by the way, this was a major breakthrough, the majority of those women who thought they had Lyme disease and the doctors thought they had Lyme disease, did not have Lyme disease, by the way. They had something called estrotoxicity. They had a phenomena in which their bodies were all when their bodies were challenged with estrogen in their monthly cycle, for example, or if they went on birth control, which for many of these women was what started what they thought was Lyme disease. When their body sees estrogen, there was a genetic variation, a set of variations that made their bodies turn that estrogen into something very estrotoxic. And estrotoxins, for all of you ladies out there, mimic Lyme disease like you wouldn't believe. So the first weird thing I observed was it was not as though there were more women with Lyme disease. It was many of these women who thought they had Lyme disease did not have Lyme disease. They actually suffered from estrotoxicity, which was brought on usually by going on the pill unbeknownst to them. And how did we, very simply, how do we start to differentiate this? This is not going off course because this is important for all of the ladies out here. I would ask one simple question. I would say, you have Lyme disease. Dr. Mansoor, I've been dealing with Lyme disease for the last 7 years. I've been on so many antibiotic regimens. I still can barely get out of bed in the morning. And I would say, in these 7 years that you thought you had Lyme disease, did you ever get pregnant? Obviously many, not all, but many of them were in the 7 years. Yes, Dr. Mansoor, now that you mention it, I've been pregnant twice. I said, did you ever notice that when you were pregnant, your symptoms of Lyme disease disappeared? I cannot tell you how many women would break down crying whenever I asked this one question. And they would say, how has no one ever asked me this? I used to tell my husband, I used to tell my partner, I wished I could stay pregnant because it's the first time in years I've felt like a human being again. And I had to break the news to them somewhat cheekily with a smile on my face. I had to tell them, the Lyme disease bacteria doesn't take a break from your body when you're pregnant. You never had Lyme disease. What you had is estrotoxic disease. And when you are pregnant, your body does not make the same estrogen as when you're not pregnant. When you're pregnant, the estrogen that you make does not get metabolized into an estrotoxin. And hence, when you were pregnant, you felt perfectly fine. But once the pregnancy and you went, after the child was born, baby was born, the symptoms kicked back in. First major breakthrough. And for all of the ladies out there, this is a real phenomenon that, by the way, we're able to see genetically and we're able to treat. But the second phenomena that is relevant to today's discussion is I'm seeing these adults with Lyme disease. They're coming to my office because as part of my study and part of heading the study, I had to interview the patients. I had to do their genetics. And I would have these adults, teenagers, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 50-year-olds coming in with Lyme disease. They're not on the spectrum. They're not on the spectrum. They're just healthy adults that happen to quote unquote get Lyme disease. And I observed something that will forever, I will take it to my grave. It changed my outlook. And it was why I became the first person in the world. If any of you have heard this before, I was the one that coined this term. I coined the term adult onset autism. Adult onset autism. It's a clash of terms. It's a idiosyncrasy. Meaning, this person did not have autism in the way we knew it per birth, per early development. They're perfectly fine. Teenager, 20, 30, 40 year, they are not on the spectrum. But what are we talking about here? We would literally have a 30-something-year-old who never had anything to do with the spectrum come into my office with stimming behavior. Stimming behavior. Right? For those of you with parents on the spectrum, some of you would notice your child exhibits something we call stimming. Stimming is the repetitive behavior. Many of these patients were ultra sensitive to sensory input. As you can see, I talk with my hands. When I would meet with these individuals, I had to speak very calmly, not use my hands, not move my face very much. For those of you with children on the spectrum, you should know that one of the most discomforting things for a child on the spectrum, which is why they avoid facial and eye contact, is the human face. Why? Because against the backdrop of the human face, there are parts that are not moving. Your cheekbones don't move unless you smile. Your forehead does not move, generally speaking, but your mouth is moving, your eyes are moving. And the complex of signals where you have things that are moving against the backdrop of something that is not moving is extremely from a challenge perspective, from a sensory input, it's very challenging for an autistic mind to process this duality, to process. See, we don't consider it weird. Now you're going to start looking at my ugly face, and I'm going to look even weirder to you. Because now that I tell you, you will start to understand that a human mouth moving as you talk, nostrils flaring, cheekbones not moving, eyes scanning, is actually a weird thing. It's multiple sensory inputs. Something's moving, something's not. The autistic mind finds this multifarious data input to be very unsettling. That is why many children on the spectrum cannot maintain eye contact. It's not about shyness, it's about the being off kilter for the movement of the face. It is also why one of the things that we observe with autistic children, if you ever had an autistic child, depending on where they are in the spectrum, and you take them to a body of water, you take them to a beach, and they're walking on the sand, they may or not like the sensory input of the sand on the feet, okay, fine. But the moment you take them to the water's edge and they see that water moving, many of these children will drop on all fours because the contextual, planar, certain things are fixed. The sky is fixed, the horizon is fixed, and yet within this, you've got this body of water moving. It's too much strained sensory input for the mind of that autistic child. They drop on the floor to reorient themselves. I'm telling you, these are the ways that the autistic mind, neurologically, certain cues. The point here is these adults that did not have autistic spectrum, they were not on the spectrum, exhibited behavior that had you not told me they were not on the spectrum, had I just interviewed this person, I would have said, oh, this is just an adult who's been on the spectrum. Yet they were never on the spectrum. They acquired certain traits that were very autistic-like. This was the greatest breakthrough for me studying autistic families, as I had been doing from years before. Because it showed me, think about this for a moment. It showed me that certain things can happen in a healthy adult, an adult whose brain, we typically think of the brain, the development of the brain, it's never finished, but the majority of the development of the brain is completed in early life. We have incredible brain development in utero, in mommy's womb. We have even more brain development in the first few months, in the first couple of years. By the time we're 5, 6, the brain is going through rapid development. And then that development starts to level off into teenage, 20s. We still have brain development. We have the potential for brain development, but it levels off into adulthood. So how is it that you could have an adult brain? You see, because in autism, the going hypothesis is something affected the brain development at the right wrong time, i.e. when the brain development was still actively being developed, actively shaping and figuring out things. Something affected the brain during that period of time, which led to the child being on the spectrum. But how could you have an adult who went through that entire developmental period, no issues, not on the spectrum whatsoever, and then later on, when the brain is completely, quote unquote, developed, they now had something that happened that then allows them to have certain classical features of children on the spectrum. This was the great breakthrough. This is something that most people do not talk about. Still, to this day, you're hard-pressed to find a single autistic specialist who knows what I've just said to you. And what was this thing? You see, the bogdiphori bacteria, that bacteria that you get when the tick bites you, what does it cause? It causes extreme inflammation, if this charger is a nerve or neuron, the nerves, that which leaves your brain and goes into your body to help your limbs move, and the neurons in the brain, they look like a charger. They have certain features. What is the feature? First, it has a source coming at the end of this of energy, of electrical input. Feature number one. Feature number two, it transmits that electrical input faithfully. And what helps it transmit? There's an insulation. Just like this charger, there's an insulation because, of course, if this charger was an open wire, it was not insulated, what would happen? The electrical input that then has to go to the end, the third feature of a neuron or nerve, is it feeds something at the end. If I did not have this insulation, my electrical input would not reach to where I wanted to go. I would get shocked if I touched the electrical exposure. These are features of my charger that is the same features of nerves and neurons. And what was happening in these Lyme disease patients? What was happening and what happens is that bacteria produces a toxin. The bacteria produces a toxin that inflames the lining of the nerve, causes the nerve as though the insulation gets worn away. So two things happen. The integrity, the strength of the electric impulse in the nerve, the strength of the impulses and the wiring in the brain becomes damaged, number one. And number two, therefore, the impact, what that nerve is supposed to do, is dampened. So what do you see as the symptom in these individuals? Weakness, fatigue, irritability. And then in these patients, you started to see them develop this very autistic spectrum-like behavior. They could not focus, certain things bothered them far more than others. They had stimming behavior. So this taught us a very important lesson, that even in an adult brain, if there is something that causes inflammation, I want you to never forget this, even if you ever never listen to me again, even if you don't interact with us, when you inflame neural tissue, whether it be peripheral neural tissue or central neural tissue, you disturb the way in which the neural conductivity, that which the brain works, that which the body works, you disturb that in a manner that will cause many of the symptoms, obviously not all, but many of the symptoms in children on the spectrum. Whether that then gets correlated into speech deficits, whether it correlates into behavioral deficits or something more severe than that, depends on how much damage is being done when it's being done. So once we had this breakthrough, I'm going to speed up now. Once we understood that even in an adult brain that had finished, quote unquote, its development, something can happen that would mimic autistic spectrum behavior, then you could imagine, by God's grace, or God forbid, I should say, what if something similar, not saying that autism, let's just be clear, I'm not saying autism is cause, far from it, Lyme disease, I'm only using that as an analogy, meaning just as there was the Lyme bacteria toxin that caused the inflammation in these adults that then led to certain symptoms, what would happen if there were certain quote unquote toxins, certain things that had the ability to inflame the neural tissue in your precious developing baby in the womb, or maybe if not in the womb, after the child is born, during those really important years of brain development? What if something enters their body, intentionally, unintentionally, that causes that inflammation that happened in adults? Could you imagine if that happens in your child? What would happen to their brain development? What would happen to their neural development? This is the unanswered question. This was the thing that changed my career and trajectory. And what we found was that is exactly what we saw in many, not the 1 out of 5 that truly had a specific mutation in a specific neurochemical receptor that can certainly lead to altered brain development or altered neural development, not that 1 in 5, but the 4 in 5 that are on some spectrum, some of them very on what we would call very, very functional part of the spectrum, some of them less so. These 4 children of 5 are the ones we started to see that this hypothesis, something was affecting neural inflammation. That's where we found the golden nuggets. And you see, in those 4 children, the issues that either impact their neural inflammation or, more importantly, impacts the way in which they handle neural inflammation, that is inherited from mom and dad. That is something we can look for. That is something we can understand. That is something we can make a difference in. So number one, we're now much better able to tell parents, the child that you had that is on the spectrum, do you have the risk of another child on the spectrum? Yes or no? 2, can you do something even if you had the risk to reduce the outcome of a child on the spectrum? Yes or no? 3, of the child that is on the spectrum, can we do things that improves earlier rather than later the child's developmental trajectory, that God willing, that child has a lustrous, full life ahead of them? All of these things are what we now do. Now I end with, and then we open the session. So I've set the stage. Even if I told you nothing, even if I didn't give you any more details, you should understand the depth of what we're doing, and it hopefully should interest you to at least want to learn more. But I want to leave you with 3 things that we discovered. 3 things. The first of these 3 things is there is an absolute parallel, and this is going to shock you. There is an absolute parallel in the uptick of children on the spectrum, meaning you've heard, all of you as parents, you've probably read things. Is it power lines? Is it vaccines? Is it microwaves? Is it something else? And sometimes it could be some of those things, just to be clear. But in other words, that we've seen this increase of children in the spectrum and we're all wondering, what's going on? Why is this happening? Do you know that there is an absolute parallel of children on the spectrum, the increase, correlating to something? And what is that something? The introduction of certain prenatal formulas. You see, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, when you were pregnant or you found that you were pregnant, your doctor, your family doctor who saw you from the time you were a child, and now here you are grown up and you're still going to that doctor, and the doctor says, listen, Mrs. Jones, listen, Omar, for your wife, Aisha, take some, what do you take? Folic acid, B9, folic acid. But as years went by, a particular version of B9, known as methyl B9 or methylfolate or 5-tetrahydrofolate, became the prevalent version of B9 versus the folic acid. And the nutraceutic industry, wanting to sell you a more expensive methylfolate, they told you, oh, folic acid is synthetic. It is. Methylfolate is the version of folate that your body makes as activated folate. It is. And so they will tell you, if this is the activated folate, why not take the activated folate? After all, it's what your body wants. And so they replaced the old-fashioned folic acid in prenatal formulas with methylfolate. Great, sounds wonderful. But do you know that that replacement is exactly the curve that you see of increased autistic children on the spectrum? Now, let me make it clear. Methylfolate is what your cells produce. Methylfolate as a supplement is a godsend. It's a miracle to about 15, maximum 20% of children. 1 in every 5 children need methylfolate, and you give them methylfolate and wonderful things happen. But 4 out of 5 children, if methylfolate is available, not made in your cell, but available from outside, available to that embryo because mommy unwittingly followed instructions and was taking that prenatal formula with methylfolate, that methylfolate, when it crosses the amniotic barrier and it gets to your little developing child, if that child has certain genetic features in their operating manual, do you know how many of these children have this particular genetic feature? That if they have that genetic feature and you give them methylfolate, the methylfolate becomes the very thing that causes the very neurologic inflammation at just the right wrong time, just when that brain is developing in utero, or God forbid, thereafter in toddler years, because mom might still be taking it as a supplement, breastfeeding, and unbeknownst to her, she's giving her child a micronutrient that is literally causing the neurologic inflammation, that in the presence of that inflammation, the neurologic networks, the incredible touch points, there are more neurologic touch points in the brain, that there are stars in the heavens. It's a miracle. For all of those networks to be created, you cannot do so with inflammation. Do you know how many children have the genetic variation that causes them to have a horrible response to folic acid? About 15 to 20%. 2 out of every 5 children have it. Do you know what is now the rate of spectrum disorder children? About 15 to 20% now. It's that high. And if we take other features, other things that I'm out of time now, we can start to build what is the genes that that your child inherited from you, that you didn't have this version of prenatal when you were a child back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 something years ago. But now in the prenatal, and that's just one of the things that we look at. So in conclusion, what I want to leave you with today is there are so many things that you can learn about not even forget your child for the time being, that you can learn about your operating manual, mom and dad, and then learn about how that is passed on to your child, and then learn about when that is passed on to your child, what are the decisions, what should you expose or not expose your child to, in order to give that child, in order to give his or her neurologic development and every other aspect of development, the healthiest opportunity for the healthiest trajectory of growth, that you would not believe how much you can learn. And that's what my life's work is. And this is not jingoistic. This is not TikTok. Here's one gene and everybody's talk. This is about actually understanding how your body works. How does your child's body work? What supplements should I take? What supplements should I never give that child? What should I know about my child's exposures? What environments do I want with my child? What environment should I never expose my child to? How do I keep myself healthy during pregnancy in order that my child is benefit during pregnancy? Okay? And the question here for currently pregnant women, what version, in order to know what version, we need to know which gene version you have, and importantly, your husband as well, or your partner, because then we could at least predict, do you have the combination 2 out of 5 children, i.e. because of their parents, will have the combination that should never be on methylfolate, ever. Methylfolate will be, and let me tell you, for many of you out there, if I give you a methylfolate injection, I can induce a migraine in you right now, a migraine. It causes such instantaneous neurologic inflammation. Think about it. Something that could cause you a migraine instantly. Think about that thing being present during delicate embryonic years. And I want to be careful here. Again, this is not methylfolate can be hugely beneficial, but it's only hugely beneficial in about 1 to 2 out of every 5 children. In the other, so you have 5 children. In about one, maximum 2 of 5 children, it's beneficial. In about two, i.e., 1 plus 2, 3, it's somewhat neutral, potentially harmful. And in 2 out of 5 children, it is extremely harmful for neurologic growth. And this is why in the United States now, the Ministry of their Health, the NIH, has now been trumpeting a different folate, folinic acid. Many years ago, I've been telling parents, if you don't know which one to take folinic acid. And it is only now caught up that folinic acid, not folic acid, not methylfolate, folinic acid protects the neurons from getting inflamed. Okay, but we have to know your genetics. I don't want to tell you, speaking as the geneticist in the room, we have to know your genetics in order. I want to emphasize, and I end now, and I'm going to open the platform. We took a bit more time today, but I hope this was meaningful to all of you. What I've just told you is just one of at least 5 different pathways we look at. We look at how good are you at detoxifying, because you could imagine certain toxins, just like that bacterial toxin, could be the culprit infecting, i.e., damaging the neurons. What is the first pain medication? In fact, what is the first medication that every human being pretty much on the face of this earth is exposed to? What's the first medication? We all have it in our medicine cabinet, or most of us do. Tylenol, paracetamol, right? It's the when your baby had your baby, that's what we have, infant Tylenol, infant paracetamol. Then we have children's Tylenol, children's paracetamol, and of course adult, obviously. The first fever you get when you're worried, the first toothing problems when you're worried, Tylenol, paracetamol, paracetamol, paracetamol. Do you know that paracetamol, an amazing drug, don't get me wrong, amazing for certain aspects of pain, but when you take paracetamol, your body breaks down that paracetamol into one of the most virulent toxins, yes, toxin, that you can put into the body. So when you take paracetamol for a short period of time, there's a certain toxin that is produced in your liver and your bloodstream that is extremely toxic for the body. Now, oh my God, so then, but Mansoor, we've got, 1 billion people more who've taken Tylenol and nothing's ever gone wrong with them. Well, your body then produces, there's a gene, your body produces an enzyme that neutralizes the Tylenol metabolite, the paracetamol metabolite, so it never becomes a problem. But about 10%, 1 in 10 children, don't have the enzyme, i.e., they don't have the gene that makes the enzyme whose job it is to get rid of the paracetamol Tylenol metabolite. Now, if I didn't tell you anything in this talk, and if you now know that 1 in 10 children do not make the enzyme that neutralizes this awful toxin that you will produce when you take Tylenol. 9 in 10 children, they'll get rid of it, no problem. But 1 in 10, that's not 1 in 10 children. Would you not want to know if your child is one of those children? And if so, you're not going to be given from the time of the first fever, the time of the first toothache, the time of you're giving this child Tylenol, 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 and you don't understand the level of toxicity you're putting that child towards. And God forbid if that child has the 2 out of every 5 children, that thing where their neurologic inflammation is at risk. Do you see how you start putting things together? This is 2 out of 5 systems that we would look at very carefully when we actually do intelligent workup with our families to help them understand what should they be doing, help them understand the food groups that can be dangerous to their children, and so on and so forth. I am really sorry. I always sometimes do this when I get too passionate about something, that I broke my time limit for myself. I trust that I've kept you all engaged. I trust that you understand that this is my, because it is so important that it's a travesty that we don't talk about these things that can actually make a difference. That's what we are here for. I want to thank Osama and Rashid for making this opportunity to be with you, to give me this opportunity. I want to thank them for their making it available, our services in a manner and a cost that we never make it available in the past. But they came to me and they said, Dr. Mansoor, now that you've moved to the UAE, we know about your work. We have so many families here that are lost. They're not getting the right information. Can you please work with us on this? And the moment I only asked them one question, I said, do you actually work with the families? And when they told me they did, I said, I'll make myself available. So with that in mind, I want to tell you that I've only given you a flavor. Obviously, this was not meant to give you the details of everything we look at, but if I've created in you a sense of wanting to know more, a sense that this makes sense, this is the type of information you've not been hearing, these are the insights so that you understood. Am I, mom, dad, how healthy are we? What are we doing when we have our child? What decisions can we make before we have our child? What decisions can we make during pregnancy? What decisions do we make postnatally? So important. This is what you need to sit and speak to someone. Not that autism is not as though it's some disease. No, but to speak to someone who can sit, walk you through, speak to you intelligently, help you. That's what we're here for, to do with you and for you. And if there are any questions now, I would be more than happy to answer. And just before we start getting shouted out questions, let me just check. The last question I answered, do you know, is it folic, methyl, or folinic? I've answered that. But in order to be specific, that's where the genetic testing comes in. And it's a very simple genetic test, and that's what, thanks to Rashid and Osama, they'll be providing you with the information to do so. And an incredible, I'm not here to sell anything, please, God forbid. And even if you don't do anything with us, and even if you ever want to reach out to me, I'll do my best to help you. That's my obligation. I've been given this privilege to learn what I have, and it's my obligation to give it to the communities that I belong to. But Rashid and Osama has made this available to you. How do we repair damage? It depends on the extent of the damage. It depends on how long the damage has gone on. I'm going to be very transparent with you, okay? As you know, damage is damage. You catch it early enough, you can repair. Sometimes the damage is too far gone. I'm going to be open with you, okay? But there's always the ability to at least stop more, because part of the problem is the damage isn't static. It's ongoing. And so the remarkable thing about the human body is if we at least stop the damage, if we at least stop giving children supplements that are actually damaging them, some of children it's beneficial, some it's neutral, but for others it's damaging. You have to know which bucket your child falls into. And if we can stop the damage, we can give the body at least a chance to repair itself. And we can help the body repair itself as well. But I want to be transparent. There's sometimes when there's just the damage, the genetic variations that could not withstand the damage. That's why we have more severe episodes. We have people, it's a spectrum. That's why some children are more severe than others. It's when they had the damage, and genetically they were not prepared to deal with the damage, then we get a more severe outcome. Any other questions? Please, now, you want to take your mic off, you want to shout a question to me, I'd love to hear your voices. The floor is yours. If anyone has a question, anything I've said, any genetically related question, I'll do my best to answer you. Anyone? Either I've put you all to sleep, or I've given you a lot to think about, or you're shy. So if there are no questions, you have our contact information. Please, if you think of, go ahead.
Yeah, hello. It's a great presentation. Thank you for your time. Would like to know, are there any, like, as in, basically what I get from your gist is like, we need to be careful or mindful of what we administer to our kids now, right? So that it does
Yes,
not get activated.
yes.
So that is preventive mechanism. But what about things which are already in the body? How do you get rid of that? Are there any other therapies or treatment for that?
Yes. So now this is the dual part of what I was referring to. It's the, of course, first, the best course of action, preventing if you know, which we can tell genetically, if you know that your child or your expected child, depending on the genetic combination, hence we test mom and dad oftentimes, if you know that there's an expectation that the child has certain vulnerabilities, perfectly healthy otherwise, but certain vulnerabilities you avoid, which we help you avoid the things that will affect the vulnerability. That's the most proactive thing you can do. Now, I know your question is asking, but what if we didn't know that? And of course, we weren't able to do that. And now we have things in the child that can be inflammatory. What can we do? It returns again. We must know what are their vulnerabilities. Is it that they have a reduction in their ability to get rid of toxins genetically? Is it that they have a reduction in their ability to take care of the inflammation? After there's a toxin, inflammation happens. So the body has a garbage truck system to get rid of the toxins. Sometimes that garbage truck system is not very good. And then if you cannot get rid of the toxins, then you get inflammation. Now the body has a fire brigade, a different system, a different gene system. The fire brigade gets rid of the fire of the inflammation. These are just two of the systems we look at. Now, depending on what's happening on the child, it's already happened, we have to know, is it the fire brigade system that needs help? Is it the garbage truck system that needs help? And that answers the question that you've asked. If something is already there, we need to know which system in the body, genetically, biologically, which system is struggling. What is the thing causing the stress for which the system is struggling? And then we begin to either help remove the thing that is causing the stress. Oftentimes, for example, we know heavy metals. Heavy metal exposure, yes, published, well established. Heavy metal exposure, but not for every child that is exposed to heavy metals. The children, the babies, and then toddlers, and then children that are exposed to heavy metals, that have really good garbage truck systems, that have really good fire brigade systems, they go on developing perfectly fine. But the children who, same exposure, and it could even come from, I'll put aside any controversial topics for the time being. Then, if they did not have the right garbage truck system, if they did not have the right fire brigade, I'm using these as the analogies of the gene systems, then that same exposure becomes the trigger of inflammation that then affects neurologic development and certain other cellular functions. So, to answer your question now, let's put it together. Once we understand genetically what systems are vulnerabilities, then we work backwards. We say we know where the vulnerability is. Is there something breaking the back of that vulnerability? And can we get rid of that? And oftentimes we have technology, we have things we can do that can help. Not always, but often. And more importantly, as I mentioned, for a vast number of cases, especially when the children are caught early, the real solution is to at least stop the ongoing exposure. But when you don't know what the issue is, you don't know what to stop. And that's what we really help when we look at the genetic insights. Excellent question. Anyone else? If you want to think about this a bit more in your own personal circumstance, and you're a bit, you don't, it's a delicate subject. It's something that is very personal to many, to all of us. And you are interested, you're truly interested in understanding, learning about this, taking the steps, and you want a few minutes with me to privately speak about, the specific scenario, and to privately ask, will this be something, could this be something that is helpful before you make a decision? I will do my best to spend some minutes with you. Rashid and Osama can open my calendar. I do my best This is something, as you imagine, I see hundreds of patients. I'm usually booked months in advance, but for this specific thing, I said I'm going to clear a block in my calendar to speak to the parents, obviously on behalf of their children. So, if you have questions that are more intimate, more personalized, and you want to know before you make any decisions, you share with me, Mansoor, Dr. Mansoor, here is our scenario. Do you think this might be helpful for us? Do you think this could be beneficial to us? I will transparently tell you if I think yes or no. And I will try to give you my time to answer those questions as best as I can.
Yeah, hello, sir.
Yes.
I just want to ask, my name is Shivani. I just want to ask that specific learning disability or it's called specific learning disorder, that is also a genetic?
It can be. It can be, and it depends on
Can
when I
be.
speak to those families, if they've had any of the siblings that are affected. It can be what we call an acquired learning disorder, meaning it is not in your genes, but it happened for the first time in that child. Or it can be something that has happened before. So the answer to your question is it can have a genetic. But see, this is the point that I'm trying to make. Most of us, when we think of genetics, we think, oh, it's here's that one mutation broken thing, and this one thing causes the outcome. What I've spent my life's work showing is that it is often not just that one thing that is broken. It is the right wrong combination of a few things. Each one of these things is not enough to cause the problem. But a few of them together, when they each have their own vulnerabilities that they contribute, the net effect is something that we observe. And when we study these children, and when we study the genetics, we get to see what is this, the net, what are these small pieces, sometimes not small pieces, that are contributing. And when we're able to fix or to counteract the vulnerability, it makes a huge difference in the child many times.
Thank you, sir. And is there any age like that? Is there anything like up to this age only we can like what it called that we can give some or we can
Brilliant.
change that
Brilliant.
or we
The
can
answer is
prevent the
again
from that.
no. The answer is there's a balance. Obviously, in a baby, which we can do as a swab, we can do a little prick for blood that we can do. Um, the question then becomes more of avoidances. So when we're talking about for babies, it's really looking at mom and dad. Why? Because in the baby, the things that we want to give, we can't give as yet, obviously. There's certain vitamins, there's certain supplements you can't give in a baby as yet. But it's important to understand if it's there so that we don't make that mistake. Now, depending on the age of the child. So, what I'm saying is there's a balance. We want to discover these things earlier rather than later so that we don't make the mistakes. Is there a limit to this? The answer is no. I treat many adolescent children that are in their teenage years with behavioral considerations, learning difficulties, growth difficulties that we treat, and they're well into their teenage years, and it makes a big difference. However, generally speaking, the earlier that you understand is the earlier that you take preventive measures. Even if it's, you don't put something in, you avoid certain things. Okay, so in other words, prevention is better than taking action most of the times.
Understood, understood. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very
You're most
much.
welcome. Dana or Diana,
Yes. Hi, Dr. Mansoor. Thank you so very much. I have a question. I have a 7-year-old son, and I took him, just to kind of get a diagnosis, because there have been, signs and symptoms that he's on the spectrum. But we clearly did not get a diagnosis. But since he was a toddler, um he it's I know that food is key to his behavior
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
to what I see, but he does not come around like specific types of foods, like for example any sorts of fruit. He used to love fruit, but
Mm-hmm.
suddenly one day, when
Mm-hmm.
he was 2.5 years old, he wouldn't even touch it, like just even touch like a cucumber or a pear, or I even tried apples, and I tried, and everybody's telling me, well, just give it to him every day in his lunchbox. I do that, and he won't even go near the lunchbox if he's completely disgusted by it. So how do I mean, I know food is partly the cure, but how is it going to be the cure in his case when he won't
Yes.
even like go around
So,
it, you know?
such a beautiful, nuanced question. Brilliant,
Thank you.
nuanced question. So now this, as I mentioned to you, I've not been able to even scratch the surface. And for those of you who are interested, this thing that we did today can be a series. What I did today was to set the foundation of the series, and then we can now, if we have enough interests, we can then put actual talking items. So whereas today it was an introduction of concepts, we can then have specific talking points, whether we do this every couple of weeks, once a month. And one of these talking points has to be the microbiome, the bacteria in the gut. Now, the reason I started the foundation, Diana, that I did today is it revolves around, I want you all, the one thing I don't want you to forget is what happens when I cause neurologic inflammation. That's why I gave you, why? To emphasize, if this could happen in an adult, could you imagine what it can happen in a child or in a baby? So this is the reason I used this story. Now, once we understand the neurologic inflammation, and here is something I want you all to know. When you think of the nerves, by the way, when you think of the neural system of the body, you know, if you've ever had some biology 101, high school, university, they used to show you this, you know, drawing of the body, and you can have a drawing of the body, you know, the Nostradamus body like this, and then they will show you the vein system, the heart and the blood vessels. And then they will show you the neural system, the brain, and all the little branches. And what you'll see is that there's this incredible, like the roots of a plant throughout the body. Nothing could be more misleading than this when it comes to the neural system. Do you know that every cell in your body, save for the floating cells, the cells of the bloodstream, every cell in every tissue of your body is touched by a nerve? So you know that neural pattern that you see, the roots of like the roots of a tree, that image that you have in your mind, that you know there's a finite, and you can, every single cell of the human body has nerves that touch it. So understand why when there is something that causes neural inflammation, understand that it is not just the brain that is being affected. Understand that it's not just macro aches and pains. Understand that your cells need, every cell has nerves that touch it to be part of the energy stimulation to that cell. This is why it's so important. Now to answer your question. Once you understand that the neural system is so primary in the body, and you understand that anything that causes inflammation to the neural system is so primary to our health, because if I inflame the neural system, I inflame the very life-giving conductance to every cell. This is not quackery science. This is not science fiction. We learned this from COVID, actually. During COVID, we understood why was COVID, when it first happened, we thought it was going to be a respiratory disease. Then we found out it was a cardiovascular disease as well. Then we found out with long COVID, it was a locomotory brain disease, that people were showing signs of increased dementia, that people with brain fog lasting years in COVID, with people that couldn't get out of bed, they feel like their muscles are no longer working. Why? Because it turns out that COVID, the virus, and other things that we won't talk about right now, cause massive neural inflammation, and that neural connectivity is to every cell in the body, not just, COVID was not just a respiratory disease. So, once you put step one, the primacy of the neural system, not just the brain, step two, anything that inflames it, you have to be able to know what it is and deal with it. Step 3. What is one of the greatest sources of things in our body that can potentially inflame the neural system? Well, of course, we think of things like we breathe, the air we breathe. You know, toxins get in with the air we breathe. We know that that's a problem. Okay, so the nasal passage. Touch, skin, we know that certain toxins can get through the skin. We know that certain toxins are produced when we take a in other words, internally toxins are produced, like the estrotoxin in women. But where is the greatest entry point? The GI tract. The GI tract. And when that GI tract has become insulted, has become compromised, the bacteria in the GI tract, that bacteria, so if this is your stomach and GI tract, this is the inside where the food is, inside here. This is the wall of the stomach and the intestinal system, and this is the tissue side. This is now your blood and your tissue. This is inside the GI tract, this is in the tissue. Your GI tract is meant to have incredible integrity. If depending on certain foods, that integrity is damaged, now all of the bacteria, including parasites, including, if you ever actually knew what was living in your gut, you'd probably be disgusted with yourself. And it's all maintained, and some of them are needed, some of them are not. But they're all maintained within a GI tract. When that GI tract is compromised, the very toxins of the bacteria, of the parasites that live within your tract, some of them we don't want. That's why for many children, it's an anti-parasitic protocol that makes a huge difference. Children and adults, by the way, okay? So what we have now is, depending on the microbiome, number one. Two, the state of the GI tract, the vulnerability of it, has it become compromised? Is it nice and tight and healthy? Number two. And then depending on the foods we eat, certain bacteria thrive on fructose. And some of those bacteria that specifically thrive on fructose, it's not the fructose that ends up being the problem, but the bacteria that grow on the fructose, when they start to grow too much, because now you're giving them the thing they love, they produce toxins that, look at the ifs. If the bacteria that loves the fructose is in the stomach, if you feed it the fructose, and then if the stomach becomes compromised, now the toxin from those bacteria get into the bloodstream, and they are extremely inflammatory to the body. And that poor child, when he was younger, doesn't have the verbal wherewithal to tell you just how much is hurting, to tell you why there's aches and pains, to tell you a headache. What does a headache mean for a child, except they're grumpy and they're listless until the day comes and until the age comes when they can tell you, Mommy, my head is hurting. But before that, so your child is very likely showing what we call microbiome dysbiosis. There's certain bacteria that are overgrowing in his GI tract, and those bacteria are what we call, they are opportunistic feeders of fructose. So when they eat something that has fructose in it, they overgrow. When they overgrow, they produce toxins. Those toxins are anathema to your child's body. So the solution isn't just about the avoidance or not of certain fruits. The solution is balancing the gut bacteria, getting rid of the species that are problematic, which is why in the field of spectrum disorder, there's one of the fastest growing segments in research for spectrum disorder is what? Studying the microbiome, okay? Do you know that fibromyalgia, something that was not acknowledged until about 15 years ago, adults with debilitating pain, fatigue, brain fog under the umbrella of fibromyalgia and neuroinflammatory disorders, is caused by certain bacterial changes in the stomach together with certain genetic vulnerabilities. So, Diana, to answer your question, you'll understand I never give superficial answers. Please forgive me. I don't know how to give a superficial answer.
No.
The answer to your question then is it's not about just putting in more fructose into that child. That fructose is acting as a literal fertilizer for the toxins that are going to come into his body. And you couldn't do something worse to your child. Sometimes it's not fructose, sometimes it's fiber. We all hear fiber is good for us. Well, would you believe that there's certain bacteria that thrive on fiber? And those bacteria, if they overgrow, will cause toxins. Again, if the stomach lining, and that's where gluten comes in. For all of you listening, especially, forgive me for saying, well, actually, it's not just, I was going to say, especially the Arab population that don't know how to survive without bread. You know, if there are Arabs amongst you, you know what I'm speaking about, right? But even the Asians amongst us, you know, rotis or whatever it is you guys eat, more people are gluten sensitive than you ever know. And I'm not speaking of, oh, gluten is the ill of the cause of all evil in the world. No. You see, we all had an increased risk. No, let me take that back. No. Many more of us than you would imagine have a genetic risk of gluten sensitivity than you would ever know. Many more, not all. But okay, you said, but Mansoor, well, okay, but not clearly. There's a lot of us that can eat gluten and it's not a problem. Well, many of us have a gluten sensitivity that we don't know about. Gluten sensitivity is what causes that gut to start to become compromised. But you will only show the signs of it if the bacteria in the stomach is the wrong bacteria. So for gluten to be a problem for you, we're not talking about celiac disease, that's an actual disease. For gluten sensitivity to be a problem, you need to be gluten sensitive genetically, which we can tell you once we get the genetic test. You need to have the wrong right or the right wrong bacteria, which many of us have now. Why? After antibiotics. Many of you will notice your child's behavior, your child's food disturbances started 3 months after he had that one antibiotic dose for his ear infection, for his throat infection. Because that was when, after the antibiotics, and I'm not saying don't give antibiotics to your child, I'm saying that's the time when the antibiotic affected the quality, affected the bacterial mixture. Now we created an imbalance. Now we put in the right wrong foods, the wrong right foods, whichever way you want to say it. Now we create a cascade, especially if the child had existing genetic vulnerabilities. So now we start to understand why is gluten not a problem for everyone? Clearly it's not. But is it real? When you hear all of these people talking about going a gluten-free diet, that must be a fad. It is a fad for many, but I'm going to tell you, for many others, getting rid of gluten has been night and day for the health of their children and themselves. Not because gluten was the monster, was because gluten combined with the fact that they did not realize they had a microbiome imbalance caused by antibiotics or caused by a viral infection. Do you know one of the things that COVID does? COVID resides in the microbiome, causing certain bacteria to grow more than others. That's why we now know that COVID, one of the consequences was it's like my stomach never worked the same after I had COVID. Everything used to be fine. It's because the COVID, like gluten, the COVID could cause a bacterial imbalance, and then the gluten that you used to perfectly have normal, no problem, now starts causing bloating, now starts causing cramping and pain. which in an adult we can communicate. In a child, they can't quite tell you how they're feeling. And then the gluten, so the thing disrupts the bacteria, the gluten disrupts the stomach lining. Now you have 1 + 1 = 10. Well, 1 + 1 = 11 in this case, because you have the right wrong combination of events. This is the functional way that most doctors do not understand. When we work with families, we do a detailed what happened? When were the symptoms? Just like you said, Diana, you observed something. You observed he was perfectly fine as a toddler, and then it was as though my child just developed this god-awful aversion. Well, that child, before he can tell you how he's feeling when he ate that thing, like you said, it's as though he's disgusted. He wouldn't even touch the lunchbox. You have to know what is that inflammatory. And the reason I gave you this visualization, once you understand that inflammation can impact every cell of the body through the neural system, your view of the human body should change. I'll give you all a personal anecdote. Dates, which I'm fasting, and it's something that we all, for those of us who fast, we know the benefit of dates. Do you know, Dr. Mansoor Mohammed, if I ate a date of which I love them, some varieties more than others, within 24 hours, all of my gums are swollen. And I don't mean an allergic reaction, not an allergic reaction, an inflammatory reaction. And if I persist, I don't want to be disgusting. If I persist in eating those days for more than a couple of days, and you would think by now at 54 I would know better, but my wife, she just looks at me and shakes her head because I love them that much, and sometimes my willpower is not there, I would begin to bleed in my stool. That's systemic inflammation caused by certain sugars and fibers and caused by certain mold that certain dates have more than others, causes such a systemic inflammation in me. I get micro tissue inflammation. The beds of my nails get inflamed. My gums, my teeth hurt. My back, I feel I've put my back out, all based on a dietary component that caused a microbiome shift, that caused an inflammatory signal into my bloodstream that then causes something else. You have to understand, if those inflammatory things that can happen in the body, if they happened when your child was going through monumental developmental stages, think about how those stages were going to go they were going to the wheels were going to fall off. The trajectory of development was going to be skewed. This is something the medical establishment is not teaching parents, and that's what I'm here to help you understand.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Sir, regarding this, I have a question because recently one of a naturopathic doctor in my state, he was just telling something in an interview that was like he said if you treat the bacteria in your gut, you can treat autism in your child. So everybody was commenting like, "What are you saying? This is a neuro disorder, and why you're saying like this?" And he was like a very famous doctor, but I don't know why he said like that. So do you think is there any connection between this and that? Because he was like giving probiotics and everything to someone who has a problem in his gut. So do you think is there a connection between these two?
Not think, and it's not Dr. Mansoor saying that. There are now dozens of publications that confirm the absolute link between the gut, the microbiome, and spectrum disorder and many other issues. The why of it is when the bacteria in the stomach becomes dysfunctional, first that has to happen. But secondly, there has to then be a compromisation of the stomach, the GI tract. The two things have to happen. When the two things happen, which often happens with now more and more children are exposed to antibiotics earlier in life, More and more children. This is why now look, we start put the pieces together. So just let me clarify. What he is saying is absolutely correct. Now, is it the cause of all autism? The answer is no. The cause of 1 in 5 autistic children is an actual genetic mutation, and that child, just like you have trisomy 21, you will have Down syndrome. 1 in 5 autistic children has a gene mutation that causes a neurochemical receptor abnormality that results in, and these children typically have severe spectrum disorder. Okay? The other 4 in 5, it's a series of events that leads to the inflammation of the neural system. That's it. Now, what leads to the inflammation of the neural system? Could be exposure to the wrong micronutrients during pregnancy, the example of the methylfolate. Could be the exposure of the wrong nutrients early postnatally. Could be changes to the gut microbiome many times after vaccination. And I've just said it, and it's known. We now understand this. Now, do vaccines cause autism? No. Do vaccines in some children change the gut microbiome such that the gut microbiome has now become inflammatory, and that child has the genetic vulnerabilities that with the two wrong things at the right time, we get a consequence? The answer is yes. So this person that you're speaking of absolutely is correct. Obviously not in every autistic child. But here comes the big thing. What you have to understand is it's not as simple as just taking a probiotic. You have to, and this is why we now have microbiome studies in autism, but some of you will have heard of something else, fecal transplants. The new field with many diseases, not just autism or spectrum disorder. You see, because the bacteria that your body accepts as the good bacteria and the bacteria that your body accepts as the bad bacteria varies from person to person. If your child was C-sectioned, her ability to basically accept more diverse bacteria without it becoming inflammatory to the child is reduced. That's why we understand that C-section children have a small, but it's important, increased risk of certain developmental concerns. If you have a C-section child and not breastfed, because mummy's nipple, mummy's skin, also the vaginal birth contributes to the microbiome of the child. Mummy's skin, the nipple, contributes to the bacteria of the child. The breast milk. If we have neither of those, we have a C-section child that's bottle fed, we have even further increased risk, not increased risk of dysfunctional microbiomes, such that as that child develops, all they're waiting for is one more hit to that microbiome. Maybe the first antibiotic, maybe the first viral infection, the first inappropriately combined vaccine. Again, vaccines do not cause autism. But the right-wrong combination in that child that was vulnerable because of what we're talking about, that is most certainly something that can become a red flag. This is my answer to you, Shama.
Thank you so much, sir.
Dr. Mansoor,
Diana,
thank you
yes.
thank you very much. It's very interesting that you brought this to light, especially I have a digestive disorder, Crohn's disease. Does that put me at risk for having? I mean, I have two children. The first one doesn't have any developmental disorders, but my 7-year-old, as I discussed with you, would that have triggered
Yes.
anything?
The answer is yes. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude to interject. I said yes to show you the importance. Crohn's disease is strongly associated with a reduction in glutathione detoxification capacity on the lining of the stomach, which then leads to an increased irritability and inflammation. That's what, we call it idiopathic GI inflammation, Crohn's disease, idiopathic bowel disease, diverticulosis. We're not saying it's one and the same, but the phenomena, the functional phenomena is there's an increased inflammatory load for reasons that we don't understand. Well, actually, we do understand. For many Crohn's patients, it's because they have a deletion. Remember that same, well, here we go. The same gene that you should have two copies, one from mom, one from dad, that about 7%, 10%, depending on ethnicity, of individuals do not have that gene. Not that they have a mutation in the gene. They just don't have the gene at all. They did not inherit the gene from mom and dad. The gene that got rid of the toxin from Tylenol, from paracetamol, that same deletion is associated with Crohn's disease. And if you don't have the gene, you're not passing it on to your child. You don't have it. You don't have it to give to your child. And then depending on what your partner or husband is, whether he has it, he has one copy of it. At most, your child only has one copy of the gene because hypothetically, you could have 0 copies. So a mother who has Crohn's disease is at an increased risk. Not because, oh my God, I'm going to increase risk of an autistic child. You're at an increased risk of not passing on an incredibly important detox gene because you not having it is the reason you had Crohn's disease or an increased risk of it. And now the child has a vulnerability. Perfect, beautiful, angelic child, God willing, inshallah, will be his health. But there's a vulnerability, an inability to handle certain toxic loads. Now, that person can go through life without ever exceeding their toxic load, but they could very well reach a point, whether it's now because so they've got the detox vulnerability. Unbeknownst to them, bacteria start changing. Maybe it was after an ear infection antibiotic or some other change. Now the gut bacteria is vulnerable. Now certain bacteria that thrive on fructose start overgrowing. And now we have the double hit one, we call the smoking gun. Right? The 2-hit hypothesis. One thing was not enough. We're just waiting for the other thing to break. This is often the case with human physiology. We have certain vulnerabilities, and many of us have them that we never know because we did not stress the vulnerability. But you have the vulnerability there, and then for those of us who have the vulnerability, and then we have the right, wrong stress to that vulnerability, then we see the manifestation of the disease or the manifestation of the outcome. So Diana, yes, if I were you, Diana, and I will easily show you this. If you were to get your genetic, I'm not selling you anything, but if you were to get your genetic test done, and we can openly broadcast it to everyone, I'm saying here and now, there is a greater than likely, a very greater than likelihood chance that your garbage truck system, your phase 2 glutathione system is not optimal, which is why you have the symptoms of Crohn's, and it is combined with your anti-inflammatory system, your methylation, which is the fire brigade caused by the toxins. One or both of these are synergistically suboptimal, which is the primary reason for Crohn's disease, by the way.
Right. Thank you.
You're most welcome. For the sake, obviously, we've kept everyone, and it's the 2 days of fasting, and there are days of a little bit of anxiety now. Oops, if I can, there's a bit of reverb. Maybe if Rashid, can you just take your microphone off just for a moment? There we go. So I'm going to end by saying thank you all. I'm going to make myself available. Any of you that are interested, please reach out to our team. I will make myself available if you're interested to answer questions to really determine, is this something that you can benefit from? You, your partner, your family. This was not, you thought maybe this was just for your children. You can now understand this is about your own health. I will make myself available. I will tell you from now that this is what you get. Notice I do not give superficial answers to anything. This is how we work with our patients. And I will close by once again thanking Rashid and Osama for making this available. And if you have any feedback, I encourage you to give that feedback. If you would like to see a series of this, meaning once a month we do this and we have a particular discussion point. This was the introduction. If you want to have a discussion point in supplements, if you want to have a discussion point on certain genes, if you want to have a discussion point in certain health concerns, we can table it, and then I can do these monthly, bi-weekly. It's the reason that I came to this part of the world, to help as many people as I can, and it would be my honor to do so. Rashid, Osama, you want to take it from here?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mansoor. That was very interesting as usual. Thank you for everybody who attended. We're grateful that you have made the time, especially in the current situation. Like Dr. Mansoor said, please reach out. I think we have put a link to how you can connect with us for any questions, or if you're interested in what Dr. Mansoor is saying. Like, he kindly has opened his calendar for further time, maybe on a one-to-one for any specific case. But please, we have shared in the chat the WhatsApp number and our details. So please reach out if there's anything else we can do to help and support you and your family.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.